Hello and welcome to Jaw Law. I'm your host, Joe McGregor from Dallas, Texas, and today we are going to talk about how to own real estate.
Any material communicated on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Nothing herein should be considered to create an attorney-client relationship. Please consult an attorney for legal advice on your matter.
All right, for today's topic, we are talking specifically to you practice owners or hopeful practice owners who want to also own your building. This is a pretty specific topic, but what we are going to share with you is critical. The way this comes up the most, for us anyway, is we are going to go help someone buy a practice. And that practice is owned by a seller who also owns the real estate that the practice is located at. And so we aren't just buying the practice, but we're also going to buy the real estate. Or at least we hope that at some point we will buy the real estate. So sometimes it's actually really common that a seller doesn't want to sell the real estate in the same transaction. There are, obviously you want to collect more rent, but there are also some tax implications as to why someone wouldn't want to do that. So breaking it into a separate tax year is a pretty common play for sellers. In fact, it's something that I would typically recommend for sellers unless we represent the buyer, because we don't like that all that often. Anyway, that's the scenario that comes up the most. We're going to go buy a practice and the real estate. Now, to you, the buyer, you just think you're buying a dental practice with a building. But as far as the law and the IRS is concerned, you're actually engaging in two separate transactions. The first transaction is you are going to form a company, and that company is going to buy the assets of that practice. You're going to do, what's the effect, as far as the law is concerned again, and the IRS is concerned, you're basically going to do a startup at that location. So you have a company specifically for that purpose. The other transaction is you are going to start a real estate company. You are going to form an LLC or some other vehicle, but I'm about to tell you why it should be an LLC. And then you're going to start that real estate company by buying that real estate directly into the LLC. Those are your two transactions. And yes, they can be separated in terms of timing. You can buy the practice this year and next year you're buying the real estate, or 5 years later, or what have you. But again, as far as the law is concerned, you are operating two different companies, and this is absolutely critical. Now, why is it that we want to have an entity for the practice and an entity for the real estate? Now, there are several reasons. I'm going to give you a few, and I don't think we can order these, so I'm going to share these. These aren't ranked, and I say that because different people will sell you on certain things like asset protection and stuff like that. The reality is the thing that's most important is whatever's affecting you at that point in time. And you'll see as we talk about these, but it's important to know that all of these are important and not equally important. They take turns in their importance. So first off, before we get too far into this, what if you don't form an entity? For instance, what if you just buy the practice with a, like a PLLC or something like that, and you own the real estate personally? Well, there are going to be some tax efficiencies that you're leaving on the table, right? There are going to be some things you can do, and I don't want to turn this into a tax episode, but it is the case that you may be missing on some opportunities to get a little more bang for your buck from a tax perspective. Now, largely, a lot of the stuff you can get credit for, so to speak, from a tax perspective, you can do even as like you own that personally. But talk to your tax professional. There are ways in which you can essentially enhance your tax operation by having it in an entity. Now, what if we take the practice, you form a PLLC for the practice, and you take that piece of property and you put it in there? Well, yeah, now we are going to like that a little bit better. And the reason we like this better is because it is going to be slightly protected. There's this concept where we talk about entities like there's some foregone conclusion. Why do we form entities? Well, the law, and we've talked about this before, but the law will treat an entity. One of the unique features of American jurisprudence is that we treat these entities as if they were a person. They're separate from you. And that's important for a number of reasons, one of which is liability protection, meaning if something bad happens inside of that entity, so again, I've set up an entity for my practice and my real estate's inside of there. If something bad happens inside of, in this instance, the practice, you've committed malpractice and maybe it's a big one. Well, your personal estate is going to be protected. So we are better off by having the practice carved out inside of this entity. And, you've got this real estate inside of there too. So if instead of malpractice, there's something else, let's say there's like this crazy, slip and fall and somebody dies instead. Now you have also protected yourself from something that might happen at the real estate that is not necessarily clinical in nature. So still better than you doing nothing, but it's not really optimal. If you have an entity that holds the real estate, the benefit here is we're going to be able to maximize our tax efficiency. Second, we're going to be able to protect our asset. And when we talk about protecting assets, we talk about it in terms of vertical protection and horizontal protection. And what this means is that something bad happens clinically at the practice. And now you're going to have these two silos. You've got the practice entity and the real estate entity. And you haven't integrated the two so that whatever happens from a real estate perspective doesn't bleed over to the practice and vice versa. Probably more commonly, something bad happens in the practice and it doesn't bleed over into the real estate. So that's that horizontal liability protection. Now, vertical liability protection, you don't have something bad happening at the real estate that's going to affect your personal estate. So you're protected from both directions. And I do want to differentiate just really quick. There is a difference. It's a subtle one, but there is a difference between asset protection and liability protection. Asset protection is really, trying to shield our assets from other assets, from other things, other consequences. And it's part of your estate planning process. Liability protection is going to be a little bit more like a risk assessment. You're guarding against certain risks. And this is the point I tell you that insurance is your best friend. We're talking about the real estate, but this applies to the practice too. There are not that many things that can happen to you as a real estate owner or a practitioner that cannot be adequately covered with insurance. Insurance is such a useful tool. It sucks when we pay for years and years and years and either we don't use it, but that's like the greatest thing to not use. It's like a good thing to waste your money on. However, I just want to stick in this one note because this is something we've seen over the years. We see a lot of bargain shopping for insurance. And I will tell you that there has been some noticeable differences between insurance companies. And, the ones that charge the least are the least interested in paying your claim. So just throwing that out there. I'm sure some insurance professional is going to say, no, Joe, that's not how it works. That's just what we've seen. So I mean, I would like to think that, you get what you pay for is probably true in insurance as well. So I guess when we're talking about liability protection, yes, we set up these entities, but especially when we're talking about real estate, just get the insurance. It is so useful. Now, going back to this concept where the government and the law treats these entities separate, one of the most important things you need to understand is that you have to treat your real estate entity like it's its own company if you want the law to do the same. So in the concept of liability protection, we have a concept in law called piercing the corporate veil. It seems that a lot of people have heard of that. But what this basically means is that the law, by default, wants to honor that liability protection, wants to keep the LLC separate from your personal estate, or the LLC separate from your PLLC that owns the practice. The law wants to do that. But litigants trying to get at you, and why would they want to get at you? Because maybe the insurance policy isn't enough at the real estate level, and they see that you've got this yacht, you got a super nice house, you got all these assets. They're like, I bet this dude has money. Let's go after him personally. And how can you do that? You have to go through the entity. You have to make an argument saying, all right, judge, we think that this entity is a farce. This is just a puppet, and they don't treat it like it's a separate company. And so therefore, the law shouldn't treat it separately either. I need access to that yacht, or I need access to the home, or whatever. Now, I will tell you, the courts do not want to do this. This is actually something that the courts try to honor, the separation. But you have to help them. Don't do things that will hurt. So what are those things? The number one thing that we hear is commingling of funds. What that means is, you're paying your real estate entity some rent, and that money you use to make your car payment, or the bank account, you go on vacation, you pay for your vacation hotels. Once or twice, it's not going to be an issue. But if you habitually do that, so the lines are completely blurred between your personal estate and your LLC, that's not going to look good. And that's going to be a problem, because now the court can set it aside and go after you personally. So here are the things you need to do. Number one, you have to buy this real estate into your LLC. Now, I say that as counsel. You don't actually have to. And we've had situations where someone bought real estate personally, and we have to move it over later. The issue with that is there are some distinct claims that a creditor could potentially make, saying that, hey, that's fraud or whatever. When you buy it into the LLC, we get to avoid that claim. And I would argue that's really tough for a creditor to make that fraud claim anyway. It's just if you buy it into the LLC, there's no claim. And so you never have to worry about it. If you own real estate that is not held in an LLC, the best thing you can do is tomorrow go put that in an LLC. I think they say best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. Same principle. That works here. Now, here, like with the fraud claim that I just mentioned, I think it is 10 years or 11 years or something like that. So you kind of have to look over your shoulder. Now, the reality is all of our clients never have to really worry about this from a financial standpoint because they're doing well, but it's out there. And especially if you're investing in other real estate, like maybe you've got like a rental property or something like that, buy the property into the LLC. So that's step one. Step two, you have to have a lease. Again, this is counsel. You technically don't have to have a commercial lease. But if you're trying to encourage a court to honor these separations, yes, you have to have a lease. And if you take government funds like Medicaid, if you have Medicaid payers and stuff, there's actually some requirements that they have in the lease that if you don't have those, you may have like a kickback problem. So you need to consult a lawyer. I know nobody wants to pay money for a lease. You want to just go to Google, change the numbers, things like that. You have to realize that you're a healthcare provider and you have some extra rules. That would work if you're, again, buying a rental property that you're going to lease out to some residents in the town. It does not work as a healthcare provider. There are requirements and they need to be met, and you need to be working with somebody who understands those. Third thing, you just need to treat it like its own business. And there's two major things. We've already really touched on these, but you need to set up a bank account. You need to go get an EIN. Now, technically, these are going to be pass-through entities. You don't actually need an EIN, but our experience has been that virtually all the banks that are lending on these, they're going to want an EIN. So just go get one. It's not going to hurt anything. So you're going to get an EIN. You're going to take that to the bank, open up a bank account that relates to this entity, and you're going to make all your rental payments through there. And then you're going to take that lease that you had drawn up, and you and your accountant and your lawyer, you're all going to talk about how you want to operate this lease. So for instance, is it going to be a triple net lease? Is it going to be a gross lease? How are we going to do this? Who's responsible for what? And all the things that you decided that your real estate entity would be responsible for, they need to be paid out of this bank account that you just set up for the real estate entity. And that's it. Not lunch for you, not, a trip to the Caymans, and importantly, not supplies for your practice. You see some money in there, you're tempted, maybe your practice has a rough cash week and you're tempted to scoop that money over. There's a way to do that, but don't use that account to make practice expenses, especially between the PLLC of the practice and the LLC of the real estate company. And then finally, you're going to get some insurance. Please get insurance. I promise you, virtually all risks can be tackled through the insurance market. Get a broker you trust and get the adequate coverage, not too much, but not too little, and through a reputable insurance company that's not going to fight you on every claim. Now, I said we would talk about why the LLC. It's more about why not. There is a reason that virtually all of these are held in an LLC. The corporate requirements, like the burdens on a corporation, are much lower. Usually there's not the same fee structure, but also most of these LLCs are going to be disregarded entities in terms of taxation, because we don't have to get into it, but an LLC's not really a tax entity. And the reason that's important to you is in the event later on, if you have to move these to different entities or anything like that, we don't have to worry about taxable events, or at least not the same way. LLCs give us way more flexibility, give us the same protection, but more flexibility with maybe restructuring stuff later down the road. Maybe you add more properties and we want to set up like what's something called a series LLC, things like that. It's just easier. So highly recommend an LLC. So much so, like if you're going to boil down the advice in this episode, I think that it's number one, it's malpractice to not own your real estate in an LLC, and borderline malpractice to own it in a different entity than an LLC. Now, neither one of those are gospel truth. There are exceptions. And also, like I said, I've seen plenty of people who own the property personally, and it's not too late. Get that into an LLC. But you would have a lot of convincing to do to convince me that you were not better off putting that in an LLC. So virtually like almost 100% of the time, LLC is the right approach for you. And in terms of entity, same thing. LLC is going to be the right one. There have been situations where it hasn't always been an LLC, but I mean, I can almost count on one hand our clients who own real estate in something besides an LLC. It used to be partnerships were a way you'd see this, but the rules that encourage that, they're not in place anymore. So those have fallen out of fashion, but that's not important to you. Just if you are going to go buy real estate or if you already own some, this episode was for you. Please put it in an LLC to protect yourself. Follow the prescription that we've offered today, and you'll be able to rest a lot easier. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I probably should do this more often, but if this is valuable to you, please feel free to share this with your colleagues. And if you have some spare time, we would love to get some reviews. That just helps other people find us so much more easily. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.